My name is Michael, and my life was pretty normal, at least until a few weeks ago. I have been married to my wife, Laura, for 5 years now. Laura and I have always had a good relationship, but something was missing, an unspoken void that neither of us seemed to know how to fill. My mother-in-law, Caroline, has always been an important figure in our lives. She is a striking woman in her late 40s, with an elegance and grace that never fails to captivate anyone around her. Laura resembles her mother in many ways, both physically and in her demeanor. Caroline has always been supportive, and our relationship was friendly, albeit with a formal distance. That was until the day our refrigerator broke down. It was a hot Saturday afternoon when Laura decided to go shopping with her friends, leaving me to deal with the broken refrigerator. Caroline lived nearby and offered to help. I welcomed her help, thinking it would be a simple task of moving the old refrigerator out and setting up the new one. Little did I know, this day would mark the beginning of something I never imagined possible. Caroline arrived dressed in casual yet stylish attire, her brown hair tied back in a loose ponytail. I couldn't help but notice how well she carried herself, her presence commanding attention effortlessly. We greeted each other warmly, and she immediately got to work, showing a surprising amount of knowledge about the task at hand. As we maneuvered the old refrigerator out of the kitchen, Caroline brushed against me a few times. At first I thought nothing of it, but each touch seemed to linger a little longer than necessary. I began to feel a strange tension in the air, an electric charge that I couldn't quite understand. Once we had the new refrigerator in place, Caroline suggested we take a break. I offered her a cold drink, and we sat down at the kitchen table. Our conversation started casually, but there was an underlying current of something more profound. Caroline's eyes seemed to hold a secret, a depth I had never noticed before. "Thank you for helping me today, Caroline," I said, trying to keep the conversation light. "It's my pleasure, Michael. Besides, it's not every day I get to spend time alone with you," she replied with a smile that sent a shiver down my spine. Her words hung in the air, loaded with implications I wasn't sure how to interpret. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off, but the look in her eyes told me she meant every word. As we continued to talk, the tension grew thicker. Caroline moved closer, her knee brushing against mine under the table. I felt my pulse quicken, my mind racing with thoughts I shouldn't be having. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Michael, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "What is it, Caroline?" She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I've always felt a special connection with you. I know it's wrong, but I can't help the way I feel." Her words hit me like a freight train. I was speechless, unable to process what she had just said. Caroline reached out, her hand resting on mine. The warmth of her touch sent a jolt through my body, igniting a fire I had tried to ignore. "Caroline, we can't. This is wrong," I stammered, trying to pull my hand away, but she held on firmly. "Michael, listen to me. I know how you feel. I see the way you look at me, the way you avoid being alone with me. I feel it too," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. I looked into her eyes, seeing the sincerity and longing there. My mind screamed at me to stop, to walk away, but my body betrayed me. I leaned in closer, our faces just inches apart. "Caroline, I don't know what to say," I muttered, my breath mingling with hers. "Don't say anything, Michael, just feel," she murmured, closing the distance between us. Her lips met mine in a soft, tentative kiss that quickly deepened. All the pent-up desire, the unspoken emotions, and the forbidden longing exploded in that moment. We were lost in each other, oblivious to everything else. Time seemed to stand still as we kissed, our hands exploring each other with a hunger that couldn't be denied. Caroline's fingers tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, while my hands roamed her body, feeling the softness of her skin beneath her clothes. The sound of the front door opening snapped us back to reality. We pulled away from each other, our breaths ragged and hearts racing. Laura's voice called out from the hallway, and we scrambled to compose ourselves. "Michael, Mom, are you guys still working on the refrigerator?" Laura asked as she walked into the kitchen. "Yes, honey, we just finished," Carolyn replied, her voice steady despite the flush on her cheeks. Laura smiled, oblivious to the storm that had just passed between us. As she started unpacking her shopping bags, Caroline and I exchanged a glance filled with unspoken promises and dangerous desires. That day changed everything. The boundaries had been crossed, and there was no going back. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a journey that would test our morals, our loyalties, and our very souls. The days following that stolen kiss were a whirlwind of confusion and guilt. I couldn't stop thinking about Caroline, about the way her lips felt against mine, and the fire that had ignited between us. Laura, blissfully unaware, carried on as usual, and every moment I spent with her was a stark reminder of my betrayal. Caroline and I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but the tension was palpable every time we were in the same room. It was like walking on a tightrope, knowing that one wrong step could send everything crashing down. We exchanged fleeting glances, shared stolen touches, and spoke in hushed tones whenever Laura wasn't around. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. One afternoon, about a week after the incident, Caroline called me. Laura was out for the day and I had the house to myself. "Michael, we need to talk," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "Caroline, I don't think that's a good idea," I replied, my heart racing at the thought of seeing her again. "Please, Michael, just one more time. We need to figure this out," she pleaded. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When she arrived, the atmosphere was charged with an intensity that made my skin tingle. Caroline was dressed simply in a summer dress that clung to her curves, making it impossible for me to look away. "Thank you for coming," she said as she stepped inside. "We shouldn't be doing this, Caroline," I said, trying to maintain some semblance of control. "I know, Michael, but I can't stop thinking about you, about us," she replied, her voice trembling. We stood there in silence, the weight of our forbidden desire hanging heavy in the air. Then without another word, she stepped closer and kissed me. It was softer this time, more tentative but no less intense. All the guilt, the confusion, and the longing melted away, leaving only the raw, undeniable need for each other. We stumbled into the living room, our hands fumbling with each other's clothes. My mind was screaming at me to stop, but my body was already lost in the sensation of her skin against mine. Caroline moaned softly as I kissed her neck, my hands exploring her body with a hunger that couldn't be satisfied. "Michael," she whispered, her breath hot against my ear. "I want you, now." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. We sank onto the couch, our bodies entwined in a desperate dance of passion. Every touch, every kiss, every caress felt like an explosion of pleasure, driving us both to the edge of madness. As we moved together, our moans filling the room, the world outside ceased to exist. There was no right or wrong, no past or future, only the searing heat of our forbidden love. Caroline's nails dug into my back, her cries of pleasure spurring me on. We were lost in each other, consumed by a fire that refused to be quenched. When it was over, we lay there in a tangle of limbs, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The reality of what we had done began to sink in, and the guilt came crashing down like a tidal wave. "Michael, what have we done?" Caroline whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I couldn't let her go, no matter how wrong it felt. We dressed in silence, the weight of our actions hanging heavy in the air. "Caroline, this can't happen again," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know, Michael, but I don't know if I can stay away from you," she replied, her eyes filled with a mixture of longing and regret. We stood there, staring at each other, caught in the web of our own making. I knew that what we had done was wrong, but the pull between us was too strong to resist. As she left, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a journey that would test our limits in ways we couldn't yet comprehend. The days that followed were a blur of stolen glances and whispered conversations. Caroline and I were like magnets, drawn to each other despite the consequences. Each encounter was a dangerous dance, a delicate balance between desire and destruction. One evening, Laura invited her mother over for dinner. The tension was almost unbearable as we sat around the table, making small talk while our minds were elsewhere. I could feel Caroline's eyes on me, her gaze burning a hole through my resolve. I wanted her, needed her, but I knew that every step we took brought us closer to the edge. After dinner, Laura suggested we watch a movie. I sat on the couch, Laura on one side and Caroline on the other. The proximity was intoxicating, and I could feel the heat radiating from Caroline's body. As the movie played, I felt her hand brush against mine, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt of electricity through my veins. Laura, engrossed in the movie, didn't notice the silent exchange happening right next to her. My heart pounded in my chest as Caroline's fingers intertwined with mine, hidden from view. The thrill of our secret, the danger of being caught, only heightened the intensity of the moment. As the credits rolled and Laura got up to make some tea, Caroline leaned in, her breath hot against my ear. "Meet me tomorrow, same place," she whispered, her voice filled with an urgency that mirrored my own. I nodded, unable to find my voice. This was madness, but it was a madness I couldn't escape. The lines had been blurred and there was no going back. All I knew was that I wanted more, needed more, and I was willing to risk everything for it. The next day, I found myself at the same spot where our forbidden journey had begun. Caroline arrived, her eyes filled with the same longing and desperation that mirrored my own. We didn't speak. Words were unnecessary. The moment our lips met, the world melted away, leaving only the fire of our forbidden love. As we surrendered to our desires, I knew that we were walking a dangerous path, but the pull between us was too strong to resist. The line between right and wrong had become a blur, and in that moment, nothing else mattered but the passion that consumed us both. Our affair had begun, and there was no turning back. The consequences were inevitable, but we were too far gone to care. All that mattered was the fire that burned between us, a fire that refused to be extinguished. The days and weeks that followed were a whirlwind of secrecy and passion. Caroline and I found ourselves entangled in a web of forbidden desire that neither of us could escape. Every stolen moment together only fueled the fire, making it harder to keep our relationship hidden from Laura and everyone else. We became experts in the art of deception, using every opportunity to be alone together. A casual touch in the kitchen, a lingering glance across the dinner table, a secret rendezvous in the park. Each encounter was more intoxicating than the last. The thrill of the forbidden added an edge to our meetings, making them even more irresistible. One afternoon, Laura mentioned she had a work conference out of town. She would be gone for 3 days, leaving me alone in the house. The moment she told me, I felt a rush of excitement and anticipation. Caroline and I would have the perfect opportunity to be together without fear of getting caught. As soon as Laura left, I called Caroline. She answered on the first ring, her voice breathless with excitement. "Michael, is she gone?" she asked, barely able to contain her eagerness. "Yes, Caroline. Come over tonight," I replied, my voice thick with desire. That evening, Caroline arrived, and we wasted no time. The moment she walked through the door, we were in each other's arms, our kisses hungry and desperate. We made our way to the bedroom, shedding clothes and inhibitions along the way. We fell onto the bed, our bodies entwined in a frenzy of passion. The feel of her skin against mine, the sound of her moans filling the room, the taste of her lips. It was all consuming. We moved together in perfect harmony, our bodies responding to each other with an intensity that bordered on madness. Afterward, we lay together, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The room was filled with the scent of our lovemaking, a reminder of the fire that burned between us. Caroline rested her head on my chest, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on my skin. "Michael, what are we going to do?" she asked, her voice a mix of contentment and worry. "I don't know, Caroline. I only know that I can't stay away from you," I replied, my hand stroking her hair. "Neither can I. But this can't go on forever. Sooner or later, Laura will find out," she said, a note of sadness in her voice. "We'll figure it out. But for now, let's just enjoy what we have," I said, pulling her closer. We spent the next 3 days in a blissful haze of passion and desire. It was as if we were in our own world, free from the constraints of reality. We laughed, we loved, we talked about everything and nothing. It was perfect, but deep down we both knew it couldn't last. The morning Laura was due to return, Caroline and I lay in bed, savoring our last moments together. "I wish we could stay like this forever," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "Me too, Caroline. But we have to go back to the real world," I replied, kissing her forehead. She sighed and got out of bed, reluctantly getting dressed. I watched her, feeling a pang of sadness at the thought of her leaving. We shared a final lingering kiss before she left, promising to see each other soon. Laura's return brought with it a sense of normalcy, but the memories of the past 3 days lingered in my mind. Every time I looked at Caroline, I felt the pull of our forbidden love, the desire that refused to be tamed. Our affair continued, each encounter more intense than the last. We found new ways to be together, new places to meet. The secrecy, the danger, only added to the excitement, making each moment we shared even more precious. One afternoon, Caroline suggested we take a trip to a nearby town, a place where no one knew us. It was a risky move, but the thought of being together without the constant fear of being caught was too tempting to resist. We made our plans, and a few days later we set off on our clandestine adventure. The town was small and picturesque, the perfect backdrop for our illicit rendezvous. We checked into a charming bed and breakfast, pretending to be a married couple on a romantic getaway. The thrill of the deception, the freedom to be ourselves, was exhilarating. We spent the day exploring the town, holding hands, stealing kisses, and reveling in the illusion of being a normal couple. That evening, we returned to our room, unable to keep our hands off each other. The passion between us was electric, our lovemaking fueled by the freedom and the excitement of being somewhere new. As we lay together afterward, basking in the afterglow, Caroline turned to me, her eyes filled with a mix of happiness and sadness. "Michael, I love you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you too, Caroline," I replied, my heart aching at the thought of what we had to face when we returned home. Our weekend together was a beautiful escape, a brief respite from the reality of our situation. But as we drove back home, the weight of our deception began to settle over us once more. We knew that what we had couldn't last forever, but neither of us was ready to let go. The weeks that followed were filled with more secret meetings, more stolen moments of passion. Each encounter brought us closer, deepening the bond between us, making it harder to imagine a life without each other. One evening, after another intense encounter, Caroline looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of longing and fear. "Michael, I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. I can't keep lying to Laura," she said, her voice trembling. "I know, Caroline, but what can we do? If she finds out, it will destroy everything," I replied, my heart heavy with the weight of our situation. "I don't know, but we need to find a way to be together without hurting her," she said, her voice filled with desperation. As we held each other, the reality of our situation settled over us like a dark cloud. We were trapped in a web of our own making, caught between our love for each other and our loyalty to Laura. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Our love was too strong to be denied, and we would have to find a way to make it work, no matter the cost. The tension between Caroline and me reached its boiling point. Each day, the pressure of our secret affair grew more intense, threatening to spill over and expose us. We both knew something had to give, but neither of us was ready to face the consequences. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when everything came to a head. Laura had planned a family gathering at our house, inviting her mother and a few close friends. The house buzzed with activity, laughter, and conversations, but beneath the surface, an undercurrent of tension simmered. Carolyn arrived early to help with preparations. As soon as she stepped through the door, our eyes met, and the unspoken longing passed between us. We managed to maintain our composure, but every brush of her hand, every shared glance, was charged with electricity. The party was in full swing, guests mingling and enjoying themselves, when Laura suggested we take a group photo in the backyard. As we gathered for the picture, Caroline and I ended up standing next to each other, our bodies mere inches apart. I could feel the heat radiating from her, the magnetic pull that had drawn us together from the beginning. "Smile, everyone," Laura called out, holding up her phone to capture the moment. As the shutter clicked, Caroline's hand brushed mine, sending a jolt of electricity through my body. I glanced at her, and for a split second, the mask of composure slipped, revealing the raw desire in her eyes. After the photo, everyone dispersed, leaving Caroline and me alone for a brief moment. The tension was unbearable, and I could see the same desperation in her eyes that I felt in my own. "Meet me in the guest room," she whispered, her voice trembling with urgency. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. We had played with fire for too long, and now it was about to consume us. I slipped away from the party and made my way to the guest room, my mind racing with anticipation and fear. When I opened the door, Caroline was already there, her eyes blazing with a mixture of desire and desperation. "Michael, I can't do this anymore. We need to figure this out," she said, her voice shaking. "I know, Caroline, I feel the same way," I replied, stepping closer to her. We stood there, the air between us charged with unspoken emotions. The world outside ceased to exist as we surrendered to the pull of our forbidden love. Our lips met in a fierce, hungry kiss, and all the pent-up desire exploded in that moment. We tumbled onto the bed, our hands and lips exploring each other with a frantic urgency. It was as if we were trying to make up for all the time we had spent hiding, all the moments we had denied ourselves. "Michael, I love you," Caroline whispered between kisses, her voice filled with a raw intensity. "I love you too, Caroline. More than anything," I replied, my hands tangling in her hair. As we moved together, the passion between us reaching a fever pitch, the door suddenly flew open. We froze, our hearts stopping in unison as we turned to see Laura standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock and betrayal. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The silence was deafening, the weight of our actions crashing down on us like a tidal wave. "Laura, I stammered, but no words could possibly make this right. Tears welled up in Laura's eyes as she took in the scene before her. The hurt and betrayal on her face were almost too much to bear. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "How could you do this to me?" Caroline scrambled off the bed, her face pale with guilt and shame. "Laura, I am so sorry. I never meant for this to happen," she said, her voice breaking. Laura's gaze shifted between the two of us, her face a mask of pain and anger. "I trusted you, both of you. How could you betray me like this?" The words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the damage we had caused. Caroline and I stood there, guilt and regret consuming us, unable to find the right words to make things better. Laura turned on her heel and ran out of the room, her sobs echoing through the house. The weight of our betrayal crashed down on us, the reality of what we had done sinking in. "We have to talk to her," Caroline said, her voice trembling. "We need to make this right." I nodded, my heart heavy with guilt. Yes, we owe her that much. We found Laura in the living room, her face buried in her hands as she cried. The guests had left, sensing the tension and leaving us to deal with the fallout. "Laura," I said softly, sitting down next to her, "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen with tears. "How long has this been going on?" I hesitated, knowing the truth would only cause more pain. "A few months," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Laura's face crumpled, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why, Michael? Why did you do this?" "I don't know," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "It just happened. I never meant to fall in love with her." Caroline sat on the other side of Laura, her eyes filled with remorse. "Laura, I am so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me." Laura looked between us, her pain and anger palpable. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you. Either of you." The words cut deep, but I knew she had every right to feel that way. We had betrayed her in the worst possible way, and the road to forgiveness, if there was one, would be long and difficult. As we sat there, the gravity of our actions settled over us. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Our lives had been irrevocably changed, and the consequences of our forbidden love would echo for a long time to come. The days that followed were a blur of pain and regret. Laura moved out of our house, leaving me alone to grapple with the fallout of my actions. The silence was deafening, a constant reminder of the destruction I had caused. Caroline and I tried to make sense of what had happened, but the guilt and shame were overwhelming. We continued to see each other, our meetings filled with a mixture of passion and sorrow. The fire between us hadn't dimmed, but the weight of our betrayal hung over us like a dark cloud. Each stolen moment was tinged with the knowledge of what we had done and the consequences we now faced. One evening, as we lay in bed together, Caroline turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "Michael, we can't keep doing this. It's tearing us apart." "I know," I said, my heart heavy with regret. "But I can't bear to be without you." "Neither can I," she replied, her voice trembling. "But we have to think about Laura. We owe it to her to try and make things right." The words were like a knife to my heart, but I knew she was right. We had to face the consequences of our actions and try to find a way to move forward. The next day, I called Laura and asked if we could talk. She agreed, and we met at a small cafe in town. The tension between us was palpable, the weight of our shared history hanging heavy in the air. "Laura, I am so sorry for everything that happened," I said, my voice filled with remorse. "I never wanted to hurt you." "I know, Michael," she replied, her eyes filled with sadness. "But you did, and I don't know if I can ever forgive you." The words were like a punch to the gut, but I knew she had every right to feel that way. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our emotions pressing down on us. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," she replied, her voice filled with uncertainty. "But I need time to heal, and I need you to respect that." "I will," I promised, my heart aching with the pain of our broken relationship. As we parted ways, I knew that the road to forgiveness would be long and difficult. The damage we had caused was immense, and the path to healing would be fraught with challenges. Caroline and I continued to see each other, but the weight of our guilt and regret hung over us like a dark cloud. Our meetings were filled with a mixture of passion and sorrow, the fire between us burning brightly, but tinged with the pain of our betrayal. One evening, as we lay in bed together, Caroline turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "Michael, I love you, but I can't keep doing this. It's tearing us apart." "I know," I replied, my heart heavy with regret, "but I can't bear to be without you." "Neither can I," she said, her voice trembling. "But we have to think about Laura. We owe it to her to try and make things right." The words were like a knife to my heart, but I knew she was right. We had to face the consequences of our actions and try to find a way to move forward. The days that followed were filled with pain and uncertainty. Caroline and I tried to navigate our relationship, but the weight of our guilt and regret made it difficult to find a way forward. We knew that we had to make a decision, but the thought of losing each other was almost too much to bear. One afternoon, as the reality of our situation became increasingly unbearable, Caroline and I decided to meet at a quiet park on the outskirts of town. The autumn leaves were falling around us, a beautiful yet melancholic reminder of the passage of time and the impermanence of everything. We sat on a bench, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. Caroline's eyes were red from crying, and I could feel the weight of our shared sorrow pressing down on us both. "Michael, we need to talk," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," I replied, my heart sinking. "I've been dreading this conversation." Caroline took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. "I love you, Michael. I always will. But this, us, it's destroying everything. We can't keep doing this to Laura, to ourselves." Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded, the pain of her words cutting deep. "I know, Caroline, I love you too, but we can't keep living in this secret world, constantly afraid of being caught. It's not fair to anyone." She squeezed my hand, her touch both comforting and heartbreaking. "We need to let each other go, Michael. We need to give Laura a chance to heal, and we need to find a way to move forward, even if it's apart." The thought of losing her was almost too much to bear, but I knew she was right. Our love, as intense and real as it was, had come at too high a cost. "I don't know how to say goodbye," I said, my voice choked with emotion. Caroline leaned in, pressing her forehead against mine. "Neither do I, but we have to try. For Laura, for ourselves." We sat there for a long time, holding each other, trying to memorize every detail, every sensation. The wind rustled the leaves around us, carrying away the remnants of our forbidden love. Finally, Caroline pulled away, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "I think we should stop seeing each other, at least for a while. We need to give Laura the space she needs to heal, and we need to figure out our own lives." I nodded, my heart breaking with every word. "You're right, it's the only way." We shared one last lingering kiss, a bittersweet farewell to a love that could never be. As we parted ways, the weight of our decision settled over us, a heavy yet necessary burden. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Laura remained distant, her pain and betrayal still fresh. I respected her need for space, hoping that in time, she might find it in her heart to forgive me. Caroline and I ceased all contact, our lives taking separate paths. The absence of her presence was a constant ache, a reminder of the love we had shared and lost. I threw myself into work, trying to fill the void with anything that might distract me from the pain. Months passed, and slowly life began to regain a semblance of normalcy. Laura and I started to rebuild our relationship, piece by piece. It was a slow process, filled with setbacks and moments of doubt, but there was a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward. One evening, Laura and I sat together on the couch, a tentative peace settling between us. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and determination. "Michael, I want to try to make this work," she said, her voice trembling. "But it's going to take time, and we need to be honest with each other, no more secrets." I nodded, my heart swelling with gratitude and hope. "I understand, Laura. I want to make this work too. I love you." We embraced, a fragile but hopeful start to a new chapter in our lives. As time passed, the pain of the past began to fade, replaced by a cautious optimism for the future. Laura and I continued to work on our relationship, rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of our history felt almost too heavy to bear, but we persevered. Caroline and I never spoke again, but I often thought of her, wondering how she was doing, if she had found some measure of peace and happiness. Our love had been real, intense, and unforgettable, But it had also been a love that couldn't survive the light of day. One day, as Laura and I walked hand in hand through the same park where Caroline and I had said our goodbyes, I felt a sense of closure. The autumn leaves fell around us, a beautiful reminder of the passage of time and the healing power of love. We sat on the same bench, the memories of the past blending with the hope for the future. Laura leaned her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her, grateful for the chance to rebuild what had been broken. "I love you, Michael," she whispered, her voice filled with sincerity. "I love you too, Laura," I replied, my heart full of gratitude and hope. As we sat there surrounded by the beauty of the changing seasons, I knew that the path ahead would be challenging, but it was a path we would walk together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future held. Years later, the memory of my affair with Caroline had faded into a distant echo, a painful but important part of my past. Laura and I had managed to rebuild our marriage, stronger and more resilient than before. The road to forgiveness had been long and arduous, but it had taught us both valuable lessons about love, trust, and the fragility of human relationships. We never spoke of the affair again, but its impact was always present, a silent reminder of the mistakes we had made and the love we had fought to preserve. Our lives had settled into a comfortable rhythm, filled with the joys and challenges of everyday life. One sunny afternoon, as Laura and I sat on our porch, watching our children play in the yard, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The past, with all its pain and heartache, had led us to this moment, and for that, I was grateful. "Michael," Laura said, her voice gentle, "do you ever think about what happened? About Caroline?" I looked at her, surprised by the question. It had been years since we had spoken her name. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not as often as I used to." She nodded, a thoughtful look in her eyes. "I do too. But I think it's important that we remember. It was a difficult time, but it brought us here to this moment, and for that, I'm grateful." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I am too, Laura. We've come a long way, and I wouldn't trade what we have now for anything." She smiled, her eyes filled with love and understanding. "Me neither. I love you, Michael." "I love you too, Laura," I replied, my heart swelling with emotion. As we watched our children laugh and play, the weight of the past seemed to lift, replaced by a profound sense of peace and acceptance. The love we had fought so hard to preserve had not only survived, but thrived, growing stronger with each passing day. Caroline had become a distant memory, a part of our past that had shaped our present but no longer defined it. I often wondered where she was, if she had found happiness and peace. I hoped she had, for her sake and for ours. Life continued its steady march forward, filled with its own challenges and triumphs. Laura and I faced them together, our love and commitment to each other unwavering. The pain of the past had taught us to cherish each moment, to never take our love for granted. One evening, as we sat together by the fire, Laura turned to me, her eyes shining with tears. "Michael, thank you for fighting for us, for never giving up." I pulled her close, my heart full of gratitude and love. "Thank you, Laura, for giving us a second chance, for believing in us." We sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, the warmth of the fire and the love between us providing a comforting balm to the scars of the past. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led us to a place of deep understanding and unbreakable love. As the years passed, we grew older, our children grew up, and life continued its steady rhythm. The memory of the affair with Caroline remained, but it was no longer a source of pain. Instead, it had become a testament to the strength of our love, a reminder of the trials we had faced and overcome together. In the twilight of our lives, as Laura and I sat together on the porch, watching the sun set on another beautiful day, I felt a profound sense of peace. Our love had endured, weathering the storms and emerging stronger and more resilient than ever. "Michael," Laura said softly, her voice filled with love, "we've had quite the journey, haven't we?" I smiled, my heart full of gratitude. "Yes, we have, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world." As we sat there, hand in hand, the sun dipping below the horizon, I knew that our love story, with all its twists and turns, had been worth every moment. The past had shaped us, but it was the present and the future that mattered most. And in that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the world and the love of my life, I knew that we had truly found our happily ever after. Years later, the memory of my affair with Caroline had faded into a distant echo, a painful but important part of my past. Laura and I had managed to rebuild our marriage, stronger and more resilient than before. The road to forgiveness had been long and arduous, but it had taught us both valuable lessons about love, trust, and the fragility of human relationships. We never spoke of the affair again, but its impact was always present, a silent reminder of the mistakes we had made and the love we had fought to preserve. Our lives had settled into a comfortable rhythm, filled with the joys and challenges of everyday life. One sunny afternoon, as Laura and I sat on our porch, watching our children play in the yard, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The past, with all its pain and heartache, had led us to this moment, and for that, I was grateful. "Michael," Laura said, her voice gentle, "do you ever think about what happened? About Caroline?" I looked at her, surprised by the question. It had been years since we had spoken her name. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not as often as I used to." She nodded, a thoughtful look in her eyes. "I do too. But I think it's important that we remember. It was a difficult time, but it brought us here to this moment, and for that, I'm grateful." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I am too, Laura. We've come a long way, and I wouldn't trade what we have now for anything." She smiled, her eyes filled with love and understanding. "Me neither. I love you, Michael." "I love you too, Laura," I replied, my heart swelling with emotion. As we watched our children laugh and play, the weight of the past seemed to lift, replaced by a profound sense of peace and acceptance. The love we had fought so hard to preserve had not only survived but thrived, growing stronger with each passing day. Carolyn had become a distant memory, a part of our past that had shaped our present but no longer defined it. I often wondered where she was, if she had found happiness and peace. I hoped she had, for her sake and for ours. Life continued its steady march forward, filled with its own challenges and triumphs. Laura and I faced them together, our love and commitment to each other unwavering. The pain of the past had taught us to cherish each moment, to never take our love for granted. One evening, as we sat together by the fire, Laura turned to me, her eyes shining with tears. "Michael, thank you for fighting for us, for never giving up." I pulled her close, my heart full of gratitude and love. "Thank you, Laura, for giving us a second chance, for believing in us." We sat there wrapped in each other's arms, the warmth of the fire and the love between us providing a comforting balm to the scars of the past. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led us to a place of deep understanding and unbreakable love. As the years passed, we grew older, our children grew up, and life continued its steady rhythm. The memory of the affair with Caroline remained, but it was no longer a source of pain. Instead, it had become a testament to the strength of our love, a reminder of the trials we had faced and overcome together. In the twilight of our lives, as Laura and I sat together on the porch watching the sun set on another beautiful day, I felt a profound sense of peace. Our love had endured, weathering the storms and emerging stronger and more resilient than ever. "Michael," Laura said softly, her voice filled with love. "We've had quite the journey, haven't we?" I smiled, my heart full of gratitude. "Yes, we have, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world." As we sat there, hand in hand, the sun dipping below the horizon, I knew that our love story, with all its twists and turns, had been worth every moment. The past had shaped us, but it was the present and the future that mattered most. And in that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the world and the love of my life, I knew that we had truly found our happily ever after.